A grown man's fist drove straight into a 9-year-old boy's stomach at 30,000 feet. The child folded in half, his mouth open, but no sound coming out. His mother lunged across the seat, screaming so loud the entire cabin went dead silent. And the man who threw that punch, he leaned back, fixed his collar, and said, someone had to teach him. He was a stranger. The boy had done nothing. Not a single thing. And what nobody on that plane understood yet, not the crew, not the passengers, not even the man sitting there with his knuckles still tight, was that within 15 minutes, the entire airline would be locked down. Federal agents would be called. And a secret that this airline had buried for years was about to be ripped wide open. If this story hits you the way I think it will, subscribe to this channel and stay with me until the very end. Leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story reaches. Danielle Carter hadn't slept in 2 days. 3 back-to-back conference panels on pediatric emergency response, a hotel room with a broken air conditioner, and a 9-year-old who kept asking when they were going home. She was done. She was tired in her bones. And the only thing standing between her and her own bed was 4 hours and 38 minutes on Delta Flight 482 from Atlanta to Los Angeles. Malik walked ahead of her down the aisle. His backpack was almost bigger than he was. 9 years old, small for his age, the kind of kid teachers described as no trouble at all. He had a Spider-Man comic tucked under one arm and a pair of headphones already looped around his neck. 14C, baby, right here. He slid into the window seat without a word, clicked his seatbelt, opened his comic. Gone. Danielle sat beside him and exhaled for what felt like the first time since Monday. She pulled out her phone and texted her sister. On the plane, landing around 9 your time, kiss the girls for me. She closed her eyes and let the hum of the engines settle into her chest. Across the aisle in 14D, Richard Whitmore was already having a bad day. Or rather, he had decided the world owed him a better one. He'd asked for an upgrade at the gate. Denied. Asked for whiskey before takeoff. Denied. Tried to force his oversized bag into the overhead bin and got told to check it. The gate agent had smiled while she said it, and that made it worse. Richard Whitmore did not like being told no. He didn't like being smiled at when it happened. He was 53, sold plumbing supplies across the Southeast, traveled 40 weeks a year, and carried himself like a man who believed the world was organized into people who mattered and people who were in his way. He sat down hard, scanned the cabin. His eyes swept right past the businesswoman in 13B, past the college kid in 15A, and landed on Malik, a 9-year-old reading a comic book. Malik turned a page. The paper rustled. Richard's head snapped toward the sound. "Can you keep it down over there?" Danielle opened her eyes. She looked at Richard, then at Malik, then back at Richard. Malik hadn't spoken a single word since boarding. He was reading, silently. "Excuse me," she said. "I said keep it down. Some of us paid good money for these seats." Danielle held his gaze for 2 full seconds. She read him the way you read a room when you've been the only black woman in it your whole career. She saw exactly what he was. And she made a decision. She turned away, not because she was afraid, because her son was sitting right there, and she refused to let this man set the terms of her evening. Richard took her silence as permission. 10 minutes after takeoff, the seatbelt sign clicked off. The cabin loosened. People pulled out laptops, adjusted pillows, flagged down attendants. Richard pressed his call button. A flight attendant named Carla walked over. Mid-30s, experienced. The kind of crew member who could smile through turbulence. "What can I help you with, sir?" A kid across the aisle. "He's been making noise since we left the gate. I want to be moved, or I want them moved." Carla glanced at Malik. Headphones on, comic open, completely silent. "Sir, I'm not hearing any disturbance from that passenger. Is there something specific? I shouldn't have to justify myself to you. I'm telling you there's a problem." Carla's smile didn't waver. "I understand you're uncomfortable. The flight is nearly full, but I'll see what I can do." She walked away. She checked the manifest, no open seats in economy. She made a note in the crew log. Passenger 14D, complaint, no disturbance observed. She didn't go back. Richard sat there, jaw tight, fingers digging into the armrest. He kept his eyes locked on the boy across the aisle, like Malik had personally stolen something from him. Danielle felt the stare. She didn't turn her head. She placed her hand on Malik's knee, gentle and steady, a signal between them that didn't need words. I'm here. I see it. You're safe. Malik didn't even notice. He was reading a panel where Spider-Man caught a woman falling off a fire escape. 20 minutes in, the drink cart rolled through. Danielle ordered orange juice for Malik and ginger ale for herself. When the flight attendant handed the cup to Malik, he looked up and said, "Thank you, ma'am." 2 rows away, an older woman smiled at him. What a polite young man. Danielle felt that small warmth that comes when the world reminds you that decency still exists. Richard heard it too. He heard a child being praised, and somehow that burned him. "Double whiskey," he told the attendant. He drank it in one pull. Another. The attendant hesitated. Carla, passing behind the cart, gave a small nod. "Serve him. Don't escalate." That was a mistake. They would all know it later. 31 minutes into the flight. Malik shifted in his seat, leaned toward his mother, whispered, "Mama, I gotta use the bathroom." "Wait till the cart goes by, baby. 1 minute." Richard's head turned. There it is again, that constant noise. Can you handle your kid, or do I need to call someone who can? Danielle turned this time. Slowly, the way a woman turns when she's already calculated every response and chosen the one that costs her the least. "My son hasn't done anything to you. He's sitting quietly, reading a book. I'm going to need you to stop addressing us." "Oh, here we go," Richard said. He let his head fall back against the headrest. "You people always got something to say." The air between the rows changed temperature. Danielle's breath shortened. Not from fear, from recognition. You people. She had heard it in grocery stores, in hospital break rooms, at parent-teacher nights where other mothers smiled at her a little too carefully. She knew the weight of those 2 words. She knew what lived behind them. She didn't respond. Not because she couldn't, because Malik was right there, and she would not give this man the satisfaction of watching her react in front of her child. "Malik, you can go ahead to the restroom now." Malik unbuckled his seatbelt and stood. He was barely 4'6". His Spider-Man t-shirt hung loose on his thin frame. He stepped into the aisle, turned toward the back of the plane, and took 1 step. Richard's hand shot across the aisle and grabbed his arm. Malik's whole body jerked. "Hey, let go of me." "Sit down," Richard hissed. His grip tightened. "You don't just get up whenever you feel like it." Danielle was on her feet before her brain caught up to her body. "Get your hand off my son, right now." Richard looked at her. His eyes held something Danielle had seen before, but never this close to her child. Contempt. Not the hot kind. The cold kind. The kind that doesn't see a person. He looked down at Malik, and he punched him. Right fist, full force, straight into the boy's stomach. The sound was short and ugly, a dull, hollow thud that didn't belong on an airplane, didn't belong anywhere near a child. Malik's legs gave out. He fell backward into the aisle, his hands clutching his midsection, his mouth open, pulling for air that wouldn't come. His eyes went wide. Not with pain, with shock. The kind of shock a 9-year-old's brain can't process because nothing in his life has prepared him for a grown man's fist. Danielle screamed. Not a word, a sound. Raw, animal, tearing out of her like it had been stored somewhere deep for exactly this moment. "Somebody help me! He hit my son! He hit my child!" The cabin broke open. A woman in row 12 stood up. A man in 15C unbuckled his belt and moved into the aisle. A teenage girl 3 rows back raised her phone and hit record. The red light blinked on. Carla came running from the rear galley. "Sir, stay in your seat. Do not move." Richard sat back, crossed his arms, rolled his shoulders like a man who'd just finished a chore. "Someone had to do it," he said. "Kid had 0 discipline. You want to let them run wild? This is what happens." Carla's face drained of color. She keyed her radio. "Lead FA to cockpit. Code 2, we have a physical assault in the main cabin. The victim is a minor. Danielle was on the floor, kneeling over her son. Her conference lanyard swung against Malik's chest as she held his face. His skin was clammy. His breathing was shallow and fast. Baby, look at me. Look at me. Where does it hurt? Malik's hand pressed against his left side, just below his ribs. His fingers were trembling, and everything inside Danielle went cold, because she knew what was there. She knew it the way only a mother and a nurse could know it at the same time. 2 years ago, Malik had been rushed into emergency surgery at Children's Hospital Los Angeles. A ruptured intestinal cyst. Rare, dangerous. The kind of condition that shows up in medical textbooks with warnings in red. The surgeon saved his life, but the repair left behind a thinned wall of peritoneal tissue along his left lower abdomen. The surgeon had been direct with her afterward. This area is permanently vulnerable. Any significant blunt trauma could cause a secondary rupture or internal hemorrhage. You need to protect this. Danielle had spent 2 years doing exactly that. No contact sports, no roughhousing, padded seats on his bicycle. She had memorized the warning signs: rigid abdomen, rapid pulse, shallow breathing, pale lips. She pressed her fingers gently against Malik's side. His whole body tensed and he cried out. She looked at his lips. They were losing color. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." She looked up at Carla. Her voice was steady now, locked into the part of her brain that ran codes in the pediatric ward. "I need a doctor immediately. My son has a pre-existing surgical condition in his abdomen. That punch hit the exact area. He could be hemorrhaging internally. Do you understand me? This is not just an assault. This is a medical emergency." Carla grabbed the intercom. Her hand shook. "If there is a physician or medical professional on board this aircraft, please identify yourself to the nearest crew member immediately. We have a medical emergency involving a minor child." 3 seconds of silence. They felt like 30. Then a man in row 7 stood up. Tall, steady, early 40s. He moved like someone who'd walked through trauma units at 2 a.m. and never once rushed. He picked up his bag from the overhead bin, stepped into the aisle, and came straight back. "Dr. Ethan Brooks, trauma surgery, Johns Hopkins. How old is he?" 9, Danielle said. "Malik. His name is Malik." Dr. Brooks knelt down in the aisle. He put one hand on Malik's shoulder. "Hey, Malik, I'm Dr. Brooks. I know you're scared. I'm going to take care of you, all right? Can you nod for me?" Malik nodded once. "Good. That's real brave." He looked at Danielle. "Tell me everything. Surgical history, exact location, what the post-op team told you." Danielle gave it to him in 30 seconds. Ruptured intestinal cyst, left lower quadrant, resected 26 months ago, thinned peritoneal wall, surgeon advised 0 blunt force exposure. Dr. Brooks listened without interrupting. Then he turned to Carla. "I need the onboard medical kit, now." She brought it in 8 seconds. He opened it, pulled out the stethoscope, placed it against Malik's abdomen, and listened. His face didn't change, but Danielle watched his jaw tighten. "His abdomen is rigid," he said, low enough that only Danielle could hear. Guarding response. "His pulse is elevated. I can't rule out internal bleeding without imaging, and we don't have imaging at 30,000 feet. He paused. "Danielle, I need to be straight with you. If there's a bleed, we've got maybe an hour before this becomes critical. LA is over 3 hours out." "Denver," Danielle said immediately. "Denver," Dr. Brooks agreed. Danielle stood. Her legs were shaking, but her voice was iron. She walked to the front of the cabin. Carla followed, telling her she couldn't approach the cockpit. Danielle didn't slow down. She knocked on the cockpit door. 3 hard knocks. "Ma'am, please, I need you to. My son is lying on the floor of your airplane because a passenger attacked him. He has a surgical condition, and your doctor just told me he might be bleeding internally. I need this plane on the ground. Now. Not in LA, not in an hour. Now." The cockpit door opened. Captain James O'Dara stood there, reading the situation on her face before she finished her sentence. Tall, 50s, with 32 years of flight experience and the kind of calm authority that comes from having handled worse. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said. Danielle told him in 45 seconds. Assault on a minor, pre-existing condition, possible internal hemorrhage, trauma surgeon on board, confirming urgency. Captain O'Dara didn't ask a single follow-up question. He turned to his co-pilot. Contact Denver Center. Request priority diversion to Denver International. Medical emergency. Passenger is a minor child with suspected internal injuries. I want vectors and I want them now. The co-pilot reached for the radio. Captain O'Dara looked at Danielle. We'll be on the ground in 22 minutes. I need you to go back and be with your son. Let Dr. Brooks do what he does. I'll handle the rest. Danielle nodded. She walked back down the aisle past 40 rows of faces staring at her, past Richard Whitmore, still sitting with his arms crossed, past the phone, still recording. And she knelt back down beside Malik and took his hand. We're landing soon, baby. Hold on for me. Mama, Malik whispered. Why did he hit me? Danielle bit the inside of her lips so hard she tasted blood. She stroked his forehead and said the only thing she could. I don't know, baby, but I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere. Now here's the part that nobody on that plane saw coming. In seat 3A, first class, a man had been sitting in silence since before boarding. He hadn't ordered a drink, hadn't opened a laptop, hadn't reclined his seat. He'd been watching. Not casually, methodically. And he had a small leather notebook on his tray table filled with handwriting so precise it looked typed. His name was Marcus Hale, Deputy Director of Security Compliance for the airline. He was on Flight 482 as part of an unannounced internal audit. Randomized route, no crew notification, total anonymity. His job was to observe, evaluate, and report, nothing more. He had noticed Richard Whitmore the moment the man boarded. The aggression at the gate, the loud complaints about his bag, the tone he used with the attendant. Marcus had written it all down. When Richard snapped at Danielle the first time, Marcus noted it. When Carla responded to the complaint and found no disturbance, Marcus noted that too. When Richard grabbed the boy's arm, Marcus put down his pen. And when Richard punched a 9-year-old child in the stomach, Marcus Hale did something he had never done in 11 years of audits. He stopped writing and picked up his phone. But before he made that call, he did something else. He pulled up the airline's internal passenger management system. It took him 45 seconds to run Richard Whitmore's name through the database. The file loaded. Marcus read it twice. Richard Whitmore had been flagged 3 times in the past 4 years, 3 separate incidents, 3 separate flights. Every one of them involved a confrontation with a passenger of color. The first, 18 months ago, involved a black family of 4 on a flight from Dallas to Chicago. Richard had complained about their children. The family was moved to the back of the plane. Richard stayed in his seat. File marked resolved. The second, 11 months ago, involved a Middle Eastern man traveling alone from Atlanta to New York. Richard accused the man of making him uncomfortable. The man was reseated. Richard was not spoken to. File marked resolved. The third, 5 months ago, a young black college student on a flight from Birmingham to D.C. Richard called her loud and aggressive. She had been wearing headphones the entire flight. She was moved to a middle seat in the last row. The original complaint remained in Richard's file, but was flagged as no action required. 3 incidents, 3 passengers of color targeted. 3 times the airline moved the victim instead of the aggressor. 3 files marked resolved when nothing had been resolved at all. And now a child was lying on the floor of an airplane because the system that should have stopped Richard Whitmore decided 3 separate times that it was easier to move the people he targeted than to deal with him. Marcus closed the file. He stared at it for 5 seconds. Then he opened his phone and dialed a number that only 15 people in the entire organization had access to. 2 rings. This is Hale, authorization 774. I'm aboard flight 482, Atlanta to Los Angeles, currently diverting to Denver. We have a code 14, assault on a minor by a passenger with a documented history of racial targeting. Crew protocols were insufficient. The passenger should have been flagged and restricted before today. He wasn't. I am requesting immediate federal coordination at Denver International, full internal review of this passenger's file, and a compliance hold on all related records. Silence on the other end for 4 seconds. Then, understood. Denver field office will be standing by on the tarmac. Legal is being notified. Do not engage the passenger directly. I don't intend to, Marcus said, but I intend to make sure nobody buries this one. He hung up, placed his phone on the tray table, looked toward the back of the cabin where Malik was still lying on the floor, his mother holding his hand, a surgeon counting the minutes until they landed. Then Marcus looked at Richard Whitmore. Richard sat with his arms folded, chin up, staring at the seat back in front of him like a man who had done this before and gotten away with it every single time. Because he had. 3 times, and each time the system bent around him instead of breaking him out of it. Richard Whitmore didn't look worried. He looked bored, and that told Marcus everything he needed to know. Back on the floor of the aisle, Dr. Brooks checked Malik's pulse again, faster than before. He pressed 2 fingers against the boy's abdomen one more time. Malik whimpered. "Danielle," Dr. Brooks said, keeping his voice low and even, "I'm not going to lie to you. His vitals are heading the wrong direction. I need this plane on the ground, and I need a surgical team standing by when we get there." Danielle looked at him. Her eyes were dry now. She had moved past fear into something harder, something that would carry her through whatever came next. "How long?" she asked. Dr. Brooks looked at his watch. 17 minutes. Danielle squeezed Malik's hand. Malik squeezed back. 17 minutes. That was the number now. 17 minutes between a little boy on the floor of an airplane and the surgical team that might save his life. 17 minutes between a man who thought he could punch a child without consequence and the federal agents waiting on the tarmac below. And 35,000 feet beneath them at Denver International Airport, 3 black SUVs were already pulling onto the runway access road. Because Marcus Hale had made his call, and this time the file would not be marked resolved. 17 minutes. That was what Dr. Brooks said. 17 minutes until wheels touched concrete. 17 minutes with a 9-year-old boy lying on the floor of an airplane, his pulse climbing and his skin turning the wrong color. Danielle counted every one of them. She held Malik's hand and watched his chest rise and fall. Each breath came a little faster than the last, each one a little more shallow. She had worked in pediatrics for 11 years. She had seen children in distress. She had seen codes called at 3 a.m, had run down hallways pushing crash carts, had put her hands on tiny chests and pumped until the doctor told her to stop. But none of those children were hers. None of them looked up at her with Malik's eyes. None of them whispered "Mama," like it was the only word left in the world. Dr. Brooks had his fingers on Malik's wrist, counting silently. He didn't like what he was finding. He checked the boy's abdomen again, pressed gently along the left lower quadrant, felt the wall of muscle tighten under his fingertips like a fist clenching shut. "Danielle," she looked at him. "His heart rate was 92 when I first checked. It's 112 now. That's a 20-beat jump in 6 minutes. What does that mean?" She already knew. She was asking him to say it out loud because she needed someone else to carry the weight of it with her. "It means his body is compensating for something. Could be pain response. Could be blood loss. I won't know until we get imaging, but we cannot wait." "We're not waiting," she said. "We're landing. I need a surgical team on the ground, pediatric if possible, level 1 trauma center, and I need them ready the second those doors open." Danielle looked up at Carla, who was standing 3 feet away, her face tight with controlled panic. "Did you hear that?" "I'll radio the captain," Carla said. She moved fast. 12 minutes out, the captain's voice came over the speakers again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are on final approach to Denver International Airport. Emergency medical personnel will meet the aircraft upon arrival. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Flight crew, prepare the cabin." Every passenger on that plane heard the announcement. Every single one of them looked toward the aisle where a little boy was lying flat on his back with a doctor kneeling beside him and a mother holding his hand. And every single one of them looked at Richard Whitmore. He was still sitting in 14D, arms crossed, jaw set. He had not said a word since Carla told him to stay in his seat. He stared straight ahead like a man trying to convince himself that none of this had anything to do with him. A woman in row 13, mid-60s, silver hair, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, leaned across the empty seat next to her and said loud enough for 10 rows to hear, "You should be ashamed of yourself." Richard didn't flinch. A man in row 16, big guy, construction hands, called out, "That's a child, man, a child. What kind of person does that?" Richard still didn't move, but something shifted behind his eyes. A flicker, not remorse, calculation. He was beginning to understand that the math on this situation had changed. 9 minutes out. Malik's hand tightened around Danielle's fingers. His eyes were closed now. His breathing had changed, shorter, more labored, with a hitch at the top of each inhale that Dr. Brooks didn't like. "Malik, I need you to stay awake for me, buddy. Can you open your eyes?" Malik opened them. Barely. "It hurts." "I know it does. You're being so brave. We're almost on the ground. Can you tell me where it hurts the most?" Malik pointed with his free hand. Same spot. Left side, below the ribs. Dr. Brooks looked at Danielle and dropped his voice to a whisper. "The rigidity is spreading. His belly is distending on the left. If there's a bleed, it's active." Danielle's vision blurred for 1 second. She blinked it away. "How long can he compensate?" "Kids compensate better than adults. They hold steady until they don't. When they crash fast." "That's not an answer." "Best case, we've got 30 to 40 minutes from onset before his pressure drops. Worst case, less. I don't know when the bleeding started. Could have been immediate." Danielle did the math. The punch happened roughly 25 minutes ago. If the bleed started on impact, they were already running out of margin. 7 minutes out. In the cockpit, Captain O'Dara was on the radio with Denver Tower. "Denver approach Delta 482 Heavy. We are declaring a medical emergency, requesting priority landing runway 34 left. We need paramedics and a ground ambulance at the gate. Patient is a 9-year-old male, possible internal hemorrhage. Attending physician on board requesting level 1 trauma team standing by. How copy?" "Copy, Delta 482. You are cleared priority approach runway 34 left. Emergency services dispatched. Be advised, FBI Denver Field Office has also requested tarmac access to your aircraft upon arrival. Do you copy that?" Captain O'Dara paused. FBI. He hadn't called the FBI. He looked at his co-pilot. His co-pilot shrugged. "Copy, Denver. FBI access approved upon arrival. What is the nature of their involvement?" "We are not advised on that, Delta 482. They have federal jurisdiction authority. That's all we have." Captain O'Dara set down the radio. He sat with that for 3 seconds. Then he picked it up again and keyed the cabin intercom. "Carla, this is the captain. I need a word. Now." Carla came forward. The captain told her, FBI waiting on the ground. She didn't know why either. But Marcus Hale, still sitting in 3A with his leather notebook closed on the tray table, knew exactly why. 5 minutes out, Malik's eyes were closing again. "Doctor." Brooks snapped his fingers gently near the boy's face. "Malik, stay with me. Talk to me. What's your favorite thing about Spider-Man?" Malik's lips moved. "He helps people." "Yeah? Who does he help?" "Everybody. Even people who don't like him." Dr. Brooks smiled, but his hand was pressing against Malik's abdomen, and what he felt underneath made that smile the hardest thing he'd done all day. The distension was growing. The boy's skin was warm to the touch. Classic signs. He looked at Danielle. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. She squeezed Malik's hand tighter and whispered, "Almost there, baby. Almost there." 3 minutes out. The landing gear dropped with a heavy thud. The cabin shuddered. Passengers gripped their armrests. The plane banked left, and the city lights of Denver spread out beneath them like scattered embers. Richard Whitmore shifted in his seat. For the first time since the punch, he looked uncomfortable. He uncrossed his arms. He looked toward the front of the plane, then the back. He was counting exits. The man in row 16 noticed. "Don't even think about it." Richard's eyes snapped toward him. "Mind your business. You made it my business when you hit a kid in front of my face." 2 minutes. The wheels hit the runway hard. The plane braked fast, faster than a normal landing. Passengers lurched forward in their seats. The cabin rattled. The engines reversed with a roar that swallowed every other sound. Then they stopped, and for 2 seconds, everything was quiet. Then the captain's voice. "Flight crew, do not open any doors until I give the all clear. Passengers, remain in your seats. Law enforcement will be boarding the aircraft." Law enforcement. Not paramedics first. Law enforcement. Richard heard it. His jaw loosened. His hands went to his knees. He gripped them. The forward door opened. 2 federal air marshals stepped on board. Dark suits, badges on their belts. They moved with the kind of precision that made clear this was not a request. Behind them, 2 FBI agents from the Denver field office. Behind them, 2 paramedics with a stretcher. The first marshal walked straight down the aisle and stopped at row 14. He looked at Richard Whitmore. "Sir, are you Richard Allen Whitmore? Date of birth, March 14th, 1971? Richard's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "Sir, I need a verbal confirmation. Are you Richard Whitmore?" Yes. "Mr. Whitmore, please stand up. Keep your hands where I can see them." Richard stood. His legs were unsteady. He looked around the cabin. 40 faces stared back at him. Not one of them looked away. "Richard Allen Whitmore, you are being detained under Federal Statute 49 U.S.C. Section 46504. Assault resulting in physical harm aboard an aircraft. You are also being detained under investigation for violation of federal civil rights statutes. Place your hands behind your back." "Wait, civil rights? This is ridiculous. The kid was hands behind your back, now." The marshal didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Richard turned. The handcuffs clicked shut. The sound was small and metallic, but it carried through the entire cabin like a gunshot. The woman in row 13 said, "Thank God." The man in row 16 said nothing. He just nodded once. The teenage girl in row 16 stopped recording. She had captured everything. 14 minutes and 37 seconds of footage that was, at that very moment, already uploaded to 3 different platforms. The marshals walked Richard down the aisle toward the front of the plane. He kept his head down. His collar was still straight. His face was the color of wet paper. As he passed row 7, where Dr. Books had been sitting before the emergency, he didn't look up. As he passed row 3A, Marcus Hale looked at him. Richard didn't notice, but Marcus studied his face the way an engineer studies a cracked foundation. Not with anger, but with the precise understanding that this was a failure that should have been prevented. They took him off the plane. The paramedics moved in. Dr. Brooks helped them transfer Malik to the stretcher. He gave them a full verbal report. Patient history, current vitals, suspected internal hemorrhage, surgical vulnerability. He spoke fast and clean, the way trauma surgeons talk when minutes matter. Left lower quadrant, previous resection of ruptured intestinal cyst 26 months ago, thinned peritoneal wall at the repair site. He took a direct blow to that area. Abdomen is rigid and distending. Heart rate climbing. Last check was 118. He's compensating, but trending the wrong way. You need to get him into imaging the second he arrives. CT with contrast. If there's a bleed, he's going to need surgical intervention within the hour. The lead paramedic nodded. Children's Hospital Colorado has a pediatric trauma team standing by. We'll be there in 11 minutes. Danielle climbed into the ambulance behind the stretcher. She didn't look back at the plane. She didn't look at the cameras. She held Malik's hand and watched the monitor and counted his heartbeats. Malik opened his eyes as the ambulance doors closed. "Mama?" "Right here, baby." "Is the man gone?" "He's gone. He can't hurt you anymore." "Am I going to be okay?" Danielle pressed her lips to his forehead. His skin was warm and damp. "You're going to be just fine, I promise." She didn't know if that was true. She said it anyway, because that's what mothers do when their children are scared and the truth is too heavy to hand to a 9-year-old in the back of an ambulance. The doors closed, the sirens started, the ambulance pulled away. Back on the plane, nobody moved. The passengers sat in their seats, stunned, processing what they had just witnessed. Some of them were crying. Some were on their phones, texting, calling, describing what happened in shaky voices to people who weren't there. The FBI agents remained on board. They began collecting statements, row by row, seat by seat. Every passenger who saw anything, every passenger who heard anything. The teenage girl, her name was Brianna Walsh, 17 years old, traveling alone to visit her father in L.A., showed the agents her video. One of them watched the first 40 seconds and said quietly to his partner, "This is going to be a big one." He was right. By the time the ambulance reached Children's Hospital Colorado, the video had 40,000 views. By the time doctors wheeled Malik into the imaging suite, it had 300,000. By the time the CT scan confirmed what Dr. Brooks already suspected, an active hemorrhage at the site of Malik's previous surgery, the video had crossed 1 million views, and the hashtag #ProtectMalik was trending in 14 states. The footage was brutal in its clarity. You could see Richard grab the boy's arm. You could see Malik try to pull away. You could see the punch, the full wind-up, the contact, the exact moment Malik's body folded. You could hear Danielle's scream. You could hear Richard's words. Someone had to do it. Every frame, every syllable, captured in high definition by a teenager who had the instinct to hit record when the world went wrong. News networks picked it up within the hour. CNN ran it on a split screen with a live shot of Denver International Airport. Fox put a panel together. MSNBC brought in a civil rights attorney. Social media did what social media does. Amplified it, dissected it, shared it, raged over it. And the airline's corporate headquarters in Atlanta went into full crisis mode. At 9:47 p.m. Eastern Time, the airline's chief communications officer called an emergency meeting. 12 executives on a video call. Marcus Hale patched in from a conference room at Denver International that the FBI had set aside for his use. "Walk us through it," the CCO said. Marcus did. Start to finish, every detail, the complaints, the crew response, the punch, the medical emergency, the diversion, the arrest. Then he told them about the file. Richard Whitmore was flagged in our system 3 times prior to today. 3 incidents, 3 flights, 3 passengers of color. In every case, we moved the victim. In every case, the file was marked resolved. In every case, Whitmore was allowed to continue flying without restriction. Silence on the call. "I want to be clear about what I'm saying," Marcus continued. "This man had a documented pattern of racially motivated aggression. Our system flagged him. Our people saw the flags. And nobody acted. A 9-year-old boy is in surgery right now because we decided 3 separate times that it was easier to move a black passenger to the back of the plane than to deal with the white man causing the problem." The CEO's voice came through the speaker. Quiet. Measured. The voice of a man who understood that what Marcus just said would be front-page news by morning. "What's the legal exposure?" "Significant. Federal civil rights investigation is already open. The FBI has the passengers file. They have crew logs. They have witness statements from every row on that aircraft. And they have 14 minutes of video footage that the entire country is watching right now." "What about the boy?" Marcus paused. "He's in surgery. Active hemorrhage at a previous surgical site. The doctors are trying to stop the bleeding. His mother is with him." More silence. "I'll have a full incident report filed by morning," Marcus said. "But I want something on the record right now. I've been doing audits for this airline for 11 years. I have never, not once, seen a failure this complete. This wasn't one mistake. This was a system that chose convenience over safety, over and over, until a child paid the price. And if we don't get ahead of this, if we try to manage this like it's a PR problem instead of what it actually is, we will lose more than a news cycle. We will lose the right to be trusted." The call ended 12 minutes later. No one argued with Marcus. No one tried to spin it. The silence told him everything. They knew. They had always known. They just hadn't expected anyone to be watching when it finally broke. At 11:22 p.m. Mountain Time, a surgeon at Children's Hospital Colorado stepped through the double doors of the pediatric surgical suite. Her scrubs were spotted with the kind of stains that told a story before words could. Danielle stood up from the waiting room chair so fast she knocked it backward. Miss Carter, is he alive? Malik is alive. He's stable. We found the hemorrhage at the site of his previous repair. It was significant but contained. We were able to control the bleeding and reinforce the peritoneal wall. He's in recovery now. Danielle's knees buckled. She caught herself on the wall. She pressed both hands against her face and breathed. He's going to need several days of observation, the surgeon continued. The repair is solid, but given the trauma and his history, we want to be cautious. He's a tough kid, Ms. Carter. He held on. Danielle lowered her hands. Her eyes were red but dry. She had cried herself past tears somewhere between the ambulance and the waiting room. What was left was something harder and quieter and more dangerous than grief. Can I see him? He's still under sedation. You can sit with him. Danielle walked through those doors and into the recovery room and sat down next to her son. The monitors beeped in rhythm. His chest rose and fell. His small hand lay on top of the white blanket, still and warm. She picked it up, held it between both of hers, pressed it against her cheek. "You held on," she whispered. "That's my boy. You held on." Outside the hospital, 3 news vans were already parked along the curb. Their satellite dishes pointed at the sky like raised hands waiting to be called on. The world was watching, and it was only the beginning. Because the video that Brianna Walsh recorded on Flight 482 didn't just show an assault, it showed a system. It showed a man who had done this before. It showed an airline that let him. And it showed a 9-year-old boy who never raised his voice, never threw a punch, never did a single thing wrong, and still ended up on the floor of an airplane fighting for his life. That video was now at 4.6 million views and climbing. And in a federal holding cell at Denver International Airport, Richard Whitmore sat on a metal bench under fluorescent lights, staring at the wall, realizing for the first time in his life that the world he'd built, the one where he could say what he wanted, grab who he wanted, hit who he wanted, and walk away clean every single time, that world was gone. It had taken 9 minutes to destroy it, and it started with a boy who just wanted to use the restroom. The video hit 10 million views at 6:14 a.m. Eastern Time. Danielle hadn't slept. She was still sitting in the same chair beside Malik's hospital bed, still holding his hand, still counting the beeps on the monitor like they were proof that her son was alive. The nurses had offered her a blanket, a cot, a cup of coffee. She took the coffee. She left the rest. Malik was sedated through the night. The surgical team had reinforced the peritoneal wall, stopped the hemorrhage, and closed him up. But his body had been through a war. His blood pressure had dipped twice in the first 3 hours post-op. Both times the alarms went off. Both times Danielle was on her feet before the nurse came through the door. Both times it stabilized. But neither time did her heart rate come back down. At 6:31 a.m., Malik opened his eyes. He didn't speak at first. He blinked at the ceiling, blinked at the IV in his arm, blinked at the monitors. Then he turned his head and saw his mother. "Mama." Danielle leaned in. Her voice cracked on the first word, and she didn't care. "Hey, baby, I'm right here." "Where are we?" "We're in a hospital in Denver. You had surgery last night. You're okay. The doctors fixed you up." Malik was quiet for a moment. His eyes moved around the room, slow and heavy from the medication. Then he said, "We didn't make it to L.A." Danielle almost laughed. "Almost. No, baby, we didn't make it to L.A. Is Auntie going to be mad?" "Auntie is already on a plane to come see you. She's not mad. She's just worried." Malik processed that. Then his face changed. The softness drained out of it, and something older and harder moved in. A 9-year-old shouldn't have that look. No child should. "The man on the plane," he said. "Did they catch him?" Danielle squeezed his hand. "They caught him. He's in jail. He can't hurt you. He can't hurt anyone." "Why did he do it, Mama?" There it was, the question she had been dreading since the moment that fist connected with her son's body. She had rehearsed a dozen answers in her head through the night. None of them were good enough. None of them were honest enough. And none of them were soft enough for a 9-year-old who just wanted to understand why the world broke its promise to keep him safe. "Because he's a hateful man," Danielle said, "and hateful people do hateful things. But it had nothing to do with you. Nothing. You did everything right." Malik looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "I was just going to the bathroom." "I know." I said, "Excuse me." "I know you did." "He grabbed me first. I tried to pull away." "I saw, baby. I saw everything." Malik's chin trembled. One tear rolled down the side of his face and disappeared into the pillow. He didn't wipe it. He just stared at the ceiling and let it fall. Danielle pressed her forehead against his hand and held on. At 7:15 a.m., Dr. Brooks called the hospital. He had given the paramedics his contact information and asked to be updated on Malik's condition. The surgical team's attending physician took the call. "The repair is holding," the attending told him. Hemorrhage was significant, but contained. He lost about 300 cubic centimeters before we controlled it. Another 30 minutes, and we'd be looking at a very different outcome. 30 minutes, Dr. Brooks repeated. The diversion saved his life. Whoever made that call, the mother, the captain, whoever pushed for Denver, they bought this kid the time he needed. Dr. Brooks hung up. He was sitting in a hotel room near the airport that the airline had provided for diverted passengers. He hadn't slept either. He sat on the edge of the bed and stared at his hands, the same hands that had felt a child's abdomen tighten under his fingers at 30,000 feet. The same hands that had counted a pulse climbing toward a number that meant the body was losing a fight. He called his wife. She picked up on the first ring. "I saw the video," she said before he could speak. "Ethan, are you okay?" "I'm fine. The boy is out of surgery. He's stable." "They're saying it's everywhere, every channel, every website." "I know." "Did you really treat him on the floor of the plane?" "I did what I could with what I had. It wasn't enough. It's never enough at 30,000 feet. All I could do was buy time." "You saved his life." "The surgeon saved his life. I just kept counting minutes." He paused. His voice dropped. "Sarah, he's 9. He weighs maybe 60 pounds, and this grown man just walked across an aisle and hit him like it was nothing, like the boy wasn't even human." His wife was quiet on the other end. She knew that silence was the only thing worth offering. "I've worked trauma for 18 years, doctor," Brooks said. "I've seen gunshots, car wrecks, industrial accidents. I've never been this angry." At 8 a.m. Mountain Time, FBI Special Agent Diana Reeves sat down across from Richard Whitmore in a federal interview room at Denver International Airport. Richard had been in holding since the previous night. He had refused a public defender. He said he didn't need one. He said this would all be cleared up by morning. It was morning. Nothing was cleared up. Agent Reeves placed a folder on the table between them. She opened it slowly. Inside were printed screenshots from the video, time-stamped transcripts of witness statements, and a 4-page internal document from the airline security database. "Mr. Whitmore, do you understand why you're here?" "Because everyone on that flight overreacted. I barely touched the kid." Agent Reeves pulled out a still frame from the video. It showed Richard's fist making contact with Malik's stomach. The boy's feet were off the ground. His face was frozen in a mask of shock and pain. This is from a video recorded by a passenger in row 16. It currently has over 12 million views. Does this look like barely touching someone to you? Richard stared at the photo. His jaw worked side to side. He didn't answer. "Let me tell you where things stand, Mr. Whitmore. You are facing federal charges under 49 U.S.C. Section 46504 for assault aboard an aircraft. That carries up to 20 years. Because the victim is a minor, sentencing guidelines push that higher. Because the victim sustained injuries requiring emergency surgery, we're looking at aggravated assault. And because of what's in this file," she tapped the airline document, "we're also investigating federal civil rights violations." Richard's face shifted. "Civil rights? This isn't about race. The kid was making noise." "Which kid was making noise on the Dallas to Chicago flight 18 months ago?" Richard blinked. "What about the Atlanta to New York flight 11 months ago? Was that passenger making noise too?" Richard's mouth opened slightly. He closed it. "And the Birmingham to D.C. flight 5 months ago? The young woman wearing headphones who you called loud and aggressive? Was she making noise, Mr. Whitmore?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "You don't? Because the airline has detailed records of every one of those incidents, every complaint you filed, every passenger who was moved because of you, every file that was marked resolved without action. We have all of it." Richard leaned back in his chair. The confidence that had carried him through 53 years of unchecked behavior was draining out of him like water through a cracked pipe. "I want a lawyer," he said. "I thought you didn't need one." "I want a lawyer, now." Agent Reeves closed the folder. She stood up. "That's your right, but I want you to understand something before I walk out of this room. That boy you punched, his name is Malik Carter. He's 9 years old. He likes Spider-Man. And he's lying in a hospital bed right now recovering from emergency surgery because your fist ruptured a surgical repair in his abdomen. He almost bled to death on the floor of that airplane. A child. Because you decided he didn't have the right to exist quietly in the seat next to you." She picked up the folder. "Your attorney will be provided within the hour. But Mr. Whitmore, no lawyer in this country is going to make that video disappear." She walked out. The door closed behind her with a sound that echoed longer than it should have. At 9:45 a.m., the airline held a press conference, not at their headquarters in Atlanta, at Denver International Airport. The CEO flew in overnight. He stood at a podium with 4 executives behind him and 300 journalists in front of him and the entire world watching through a satellite feed. Yesterday evening, a passenger aboard one of our flights physically assaulted a 9-year-old child. The child, Malik Carter, sustained serious injuries requiring emergency surgery. He is currently recovering at Children's Hospital, Colorado. On behalf of this airline, I want to say directly to Malik and his mother, Danielle Carter, we are sorry. We failed you. He paused. His hands gripped the sides of the podium. But I also need to tell you something that is harder to say. This was not an isolated failure. An internal review initiated by our own security compliance team has revealed that the passenger responsible for this assault had been involved in 3 prior incidents on our flights. In every case, the incidents involved confrontations with passengers of color. In every case, our response was to move the targeted passenger rather than address the aggressor. In every case, the matter was closed without meaningful action. The room erupted. Questions flew from every direction. The CEO raised his hand. "We are not going to hide from this. We are not going to manage this. We are going to fix it." Effective immediately, I am announcing a full external review of our passenger incident management system. We are implementing mandatory racial bias and conflict de-escalation training for every crew member at every level. We are building a real-time passenger threat flagging system that ensures individuals with documented histories of aggression are identified and restricted before they board. And we are adopting a zero-tolerance lifetime ban policy for any passenger who commits an act of violence aboard our aircraft. He stopped, looked directly into the cameras. I've been in this industry for 29 years. I've never had to stand in front of the country and say that a child was hurt on one of our planes because our own system failed to act on information we already had. That's on us, not on the crew, not on the passengers, on the leadership that allowed this process to exist, including me. He stepped back from the podium. He did not take questions. At 10:30 a.m., Marcus Hale sat in a conference room on the second floor of the airport's Federal Operations Wing. Across from him were 2 FBI agents, a Department of Justice civil rights investigator, and an attorney from the airline's legal team. Marcus placed his leather notebook on the table. 87 pages of handwritten observations from his audit of Flight 482. "I'll testify," he said, "to whatever body needs to hear it. Grand jury, federal court, congressional subcommittee. I was on that plane. I saw everything. I saw the pattern in this man's file before the wheels touched the ground. And I saw a system that had every opportunity to prevent what happened to that boy and chose not to." The DOJ investigator looked at him. "You understand that testifying publicly could put your position at the airline at risk. I understand that a 9-year-old is in a hospital bed. I understand that 3 other passengers were moved to worse seats so that a violent man could keep his. I understand that I work for a company that marked those files as resolved, when the only thing that got resolved was the company's discomfort. My position is the last thing I'm worried about." The airline's attorney shifted in his chair. He didn't object. He knew better. At 11 a.m., Dr. Brooks drove to Children's Hospital, Colorado. He didn't call ahead. He walked through the front entrance, showed his credentials, and asked to see Malik Carter. A nurse led him to the room. Danielle was still in the chair. She looked up when he walked in. Her eyes were heavy but alert. "Dr. Brooks, how's he doing?" "He woke up this morning. He's sleeping again now. They said the repair is holding." Dr. Brooks nodded. He stood at the foot of the bed and looked at Malik. Small frame under a white blanket, IV line in his left arm. Monitor beeping steady. A Spider-Man comic on the bedside table, its pages bent from being shoved into a backpack. "I called the surgical team this morning," Dr. Brooks said. "They told me another 30 minutes and the outcome would have been very different." "I know," Danielle said. "You made the right call. Pushing for the diversion, going to the cockpit, not waiting. I'm a nurse. I knew what I was looking at." "You're more than a nurse, Danielle. You're the reason your son is alive." Danielle looked at him. Her expression didn't soften. It couldn't. She had spent the last 16 hours holding everything together with nothing but willpower and caffeine and the relentless refusal to fall apart in front of her child. "He asked me why the man hit him," she said. "That's what he wanted to know when he woke up. Not where he was, not what happened in surgery. Why?" Dr. Brooks said nothing. "I gave him the best answer I could. I told him the man was hateful, that it had nothing to do with him, that he did everything right. And he looked at me and said, 'I was just going to the bathroom.'" Her voice caught. She pressed her fingers against her eyes. He was just going to the bathroom. That's all he was doing. Walking down an aisle, being a child. And a grown man decided that was enough reason to put his hands on my son. Dr. Brooks pulled a chair from the corner of the room and sat down beside her. He didn't touch her. He didn't offer empty comfort. He sat there and held the weight of the moment with her, because sometimes the only thing you can do for someone in pain is refuse to leave the room. They sat in silence for 4 minutes. Then Malik stirred. His eyes opened halfway. He saw Dr. Brooks and his face changed. Not fear, recognition. "Hey, Spider-Man," Dr. Brooks said. Malik almost smiled. "Hey, how you feeling?" "Sore." "That's expected. Your body went through a lot. But you know what? You held on. You did exactly what you needed to do. My mom said you helped me on the plane." "I did what I could. Your mom did the heavy lifting. She's the one who got that plane on the ground." Malik looked at Danielle. "You went to the pilot?" "I knocked on the cockpit door, baby." "Isn't that not allowed?" "Probably. I didn't care." Malik processed that. Then he said something that stopped both adults in the room. "If you didn't knock, would I have died?" Danielle's entire body went rigid. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "The doctors took care of you," she said carefully. "But if the plane didn't land, they couldn't have, right?" Dr. Brooks stepped in. "Malik, your mom made a decision that saved your life. She knew what was wrong. She knew you needed help fast. And she didn't wait for permission. That's not something everyone can do. She did it because she loves you and because she's really, really good at her job." Malik looked at his mother. "You saved me?" Danielle's hand went to her mouth. She nodded once. That was all she could manage. Malik reached out and took her other hand. "Thank you, Mama." 3 words, 9-year-old voice, hospital bed. A child thanking his mother for keeping him alive. Dr. Brooks stood up quietly and walked to the window. He turned his back to them. He put his hands in his pockets, and he stood there for a long time, because he was a trauma surgeon with 18 years of experience, and he had seen things that would break most people. But he had never in his life heard anything that hit as hard as a 9-year-old boy saying thank you to his mother for not letting him die on an airplane. At 12:17 p.m., Danielle's phone buzzed with a text from a number she didn't recognize. She almost ignored it. Then she read it. "Ms. Carter, this is Marcus Hale. I was a passenger on Flight 482 and a member of the airline's security compliance team. I witnessed the entire incident. I want you to know that I have turned over my complete audit notes to federal investigators, and I have volunteered to testify on your son's behalf. The airline's internal failures that allowed this to happen are fully documented. If you need anything at all, Please don't hesitate to reach out. You and Malik are not alone in this." Danielle read the message 3 times. Then she typed back 4 words. "Thank you, Mr. Hale." She put the phone down. She looked at Malik, who had fallen asleep again, his hand still wrapped around hers. She looked at Dr. Books, who was still standing by the window, still facing away, still holding himself together the way men hold themselves together when they don't want anyone to see them break. She looked at the Spider-Man comic on the bedside table. Bent pages, worn cover, a 9-year-old boy's favorite story about a hero who helps everybody, even the people who don't like him. And Danielle Carter made a decision. She was not going to let this end with a press conference and an apology. She was not going to let this fade into a news cycle and disappear. She was not going to accept policy changes written on paper that might never become policy changes lived in practice. She was going to fight. Not with fists, not with rage, not with the kind of violence that had put her son in this bed. She was going to fight with truth, with testimony, with the one weapon that men like Richard Whitmore had never had to face. A mother who would not stop talking until every single person who looked the other way was forced to look straight ahead. Outside the hospital, the satellite trucks multiplied. 6 now, then 8. Reporters set up on the sidewalk with microphones and earpieces, waiting for a statement, waiting for a face to attach to the story the whole country was watching. They didn't know it yet, but the face they were waiting for was sitting in a plastic chair beside a hospital bed, holding a sleeping boy's hand, already building the words she would say when she finally walked through those doors. And those words would change everything. Danielle walked out of Children's Hospital, Colorado at 2:17 p.m. on Wednesday afternoon. She hadn't changed clothes. She hadn't fixed her hair. She hadn't slept more than 40 minutes in the last 36 hours. She was still wearing the same gray cardigan she'd boarded Flight 482 in, still had the conference lanyard in her pocket, still had Malik's blood on the cuff of her left sleeve from when she'd held him on the floor of that airplane. She didn't care about any of that. She cared about one thing. She had something to say, and the entire country was about to hear it. 14 satellite trucks lined the hospital's front access road. Reporters from every major network stood behind a roped perimeter with cameras already running. When the hospital doors opened and Danielle stepped through, every lens swung toward her like a compass, finding north. She walked to the cluster of microphones that had been set up on a small table outside the entrance. She didn't have notes. She didn't have a publicist. She didn't have a lawyer standing behind her coaching her on what to say. She had herself. That was enough. She stood there for 3 seconds before speaking. She let the cameras settle. She let the noise die. And then she spoke in a voice that was calm and steady and carried the weight of a woman who had been through fire and come out the other side still standing. "My name is Danielle Carter. I'm a pediatric nurse from Los Angeles. 2 days ago, I was on Delta Flight 482 with my son Malik. He is 9 years old. He was reading a comic book. He was wearing his favorite Spider-Man shirt. He asked me if he could use the restroom, and a man he had never met, a man he had never spoken to, a man who had no reason in this world to touch my child, reached across an aisle and punched my son in the stomach." She paused, not for effect, because her throat tightened and she needed a second to push through it. Malik has a medical condition. A previous surgery left part of his abdomen vulnerable. That punch caused internal bleeding. My son was on the floor of an airplane, gasping for air, while a stranger sat back in his seat and said someone had to teach him. Teach him what? My son was quiet. My son was polite. My son did nothing. Nothing. Her voice cracked on the last word. She caught it. Malik is alive because a doctor on that flight knew what to do, because a pilot listened to a mother who was scared out of her mind, because this plane landed in Denver instead of flying on to LA while my boy bled internally. 30 more minutes and I might not be standing here talking about my son. I might be planning his funeral. The silence among the reporters was absolute. But I'm not here just to tell you what happened to Malik. I'm here to tell you what happened before Malik. Because this man, the man who punched my child, had done this before. 3 times, on 3 different flights to 3 different people of color. And every single time, the airline moved the victim. They moved the black family. They moved the Middle Eastern man. They moved the young black woman. And they let him stay. They let him fly again. They marked the file closed and they moved on. Until there was nobody left to move. Until the only person in his path was a 9-year-old boy who weighed 62 pounds. A reporter in the front row lowered her microphone. Her hand was shaking. "I'm not asking for sympathy. My son is alive. He's recovering. He's strong. But I am asking this country a question. How many files have to be marked resolved before someone actually resolves something? How many families have to be moved to the back of the plane before someone asks why the man causing the problem keeps his seat? How many children have to get hurt before a system that sees the danger decides it's worth doing something about it?" She stopped, took a breath, looked directly into the center camera. My son was sitting in seat 14C, reading Spider-Man, hurting no one. And the world that was supposed to protect him didn't. So now I will, and I will not stop. She turned and walked back into the hospital. She did not take questions. She did not need to. The clip ran on every network within 30 minutes. Full, unedited, 2 minutes and 47 seconds. By 4 p.m. Eastern, it had been viewed over 20 million times. By 6 p.m., it was the most shared video in the country. By nightfall, Protect Malik had become more than a hashtag. It had become a movement. And inside the hospital room, Malik was awake. A nurse had turned on the television at his request, and he saw his mother's face on the screen. "Mama, you're on the news." Danielle sat down beside him and took his hand. "I know, baby." "What did you say?" "I told them the truth. About the man? About everything." Malik watched the screen for a moment. A news anchor was replaying the clip. He saw his mother standing at the microphones, and he heard her say his name, and he watched her not cry, even though he could tell she wanted to. "You didn't cry," he said, "not on camera." "Did you cry after?" Danielle pressed her lips together. "Yeah, I did." "That's okay, Mama. Dad always said crying means you're brave enough to feel it." Danielle closed her eyes. Malik's father, Deshaun, had died 3 years earlier. Car accident on the 405. Malik was 6. He still quoted his father like the man was sitting in the next room. And every time he did, it hit Danielle like a wave she wasn't ready for. "Your dad was right," she said softly. "He would have been really mad about what happened." "Yes, he would. But he would have been proud of you." Danielle couldn't speak for 10 seconds. She just held his hand and breathed. At 5:45 p.m. Mountain Time, Danielle's phone rang. The caller ID showed a Washington, D.C. area code. She almost let it go to voicemail. Then something told her to answer. "Miss Carter, my name is Gloria Worthington. I'm a civil rights attorney based in Washington. I've represented families in cases involving airline discrimination, federal civil rights violations, and institutional accountability. I watched your statement outside the hospital today. I'm calling to offer my services to you and your son, pro bono." Danielle leaned back in her chair. "Pro bono? You don't even know me. I know your son was assaulted on an airplane by a man the airline had already identified as a threat. I know that company failed to act on its own records. I know there's a federal investigation open. And I know you stood in front of the entire country today and told the truth without flinching. That's enough for me to know exactly who you are, Miss Carter." What would this look like? A federal civil rights lawsuit against the airline, not just for what happened on Flight 482, but for the systemic failures that led to it. 3 prior incidents, 3 passengers targeted, 3 files buried. That's a pattern, and patterns are what win cases. Danielle was quiet. She looked at Malik, who had fallen asleep again with the television still on. "My son almost died," she said. "I know. I don't want money. I want it to never happen again." Then we make sure the remedy isn't just financial. We push for structural reform, mandated oversight, independent review boards, transparency in how passenger complaints are handled, especially complaints involving race. We make this about the system, not just the man. You can do that? Ms. Carter, I've been doing this for 22 years. I have never had a case with this much evidence, this much public support, and this clear a pattern. This isn't just winnable. This is the kind of case that changes policy for an entire industry. Danielle closed her eyes. She made a decision in 4 seconds. When can you be here? I'm already booked on a 7 a.m. flight. I'll be at the hospital by noon tomorrow. At 7 p.m., the airline released its second public statement. This one wasn't from the CEO. It came from the board of directors. 8 sentences, clinical, carefully worded. It announced the immediate suspension of 3 senior executives in the passenger safety division, pending the outcome of the internal review. It confirmed the creation of an independent oversight panel. And it acknowledged, in language that had clearly been reviewed by a team of attorneys, that failures at multiple levels of our organization contributed to the conditions that allowed this incident to occur. Marcus Hale read the statement from his hotel room. He read it twice. Then he called the one person at the company he still trusted, Janine Polk, the head of internal ethics. "Did you see the board statement?" he asked. "I wrote half of it," Janine said. "The other half got edited by legal until it barely said anything. 3 executives suspended. Who? VP of Passenger Relations, Director of In-Flight Security, Regional Compliance Manager for the Southeast Region." The Southeast Region. That's where all 3 of Whitmore's previous flights originated. Exactly. The regional compliance manager signed off on every one of those resolved files. She never escalated, never flagged, never asked why the same passenger kept showing up with the same kind of complaint against the same kind of people. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Janine, I've been at this company for 11 years. How many other Richard Whitmores are in our system right now?" She didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was tight. "I pulled a preliminary query this afternoon. Passengers with 3 or more behavioral incident flags who were never restricted or banned. How many?" 217. Marcus sat down. 217 passengers with repeat behavioral flags and no action taken. That's just in the domestic system. I haven't run international yet. How many of those involve complaints filed by passengers of color? I don't have that breakdown yet. But Marcus, you and I both know what that number is going to look like. He did know. He had known for years. He had written reports. He had filed recommendations. He had sat in conference rooms and said the words systemic risk to people who nodded and took notes and changed nothing. This time it's different, he said. Is it? Or are we going to patch the hole and move on like we always do? Not if I have anything to say about it, and not if Danielle Carter has anything to say about it. That woman stood in front of the entire country today and said what I've been writing in internal memos for years, except she said it better, and she said it louder, and 12 million people heard her. At 8:30 p.m., something unexpected happened. Brianna Walsh, the 17-year-old who recorded the video on Flight 482, posted a second video, not of the incident, of herself, sitting on her father's couch in his apartment in Los Angeles, looking directly into her phone camera. "Hey everybody, my name is Brianna. I was on that flight. I was in row 16. I'm the one who recorded the video that everyone's been sharing. And I want to tell you something that the video doesn't show." She paused. Her eyes were red. "Before the man hit Malik, I heard him talking. Not loud, under his breath. I was 3 rows back and the cabin was quiet enough that I could hear him. He kept saying things about the boy, about his mother. Things I'm not going to repeat because they were disgusting and racist and no one needs to hear them twice. But I want people to know. This wasn't a man who lost his temper. This was a man who was looking for a reason. He had already decided what he was going to do. He just needed to convince himself it was justified." She wiped her eyes. "I'm 17. I've never seen an adult hit a child like that. I've never heard a little kid gasp for air like that. I started recording because I could feel something bad was about to happen. I didn't know it was going to be that bad. And when it happened, I just kept the camera steady because I thought, someone needs to see this. Someone needs to know what happened on this plane. Because if I stop recording, maybe nobody believes it." She looked down at her hands. "Malik, If you ever see this, you didn't deserve that. Nobody deserves that. And I'm sorry I couldn't do anything except hold up my phone. I wish I could have done more. That video hit 5 million views in 3 hours. Brianna's words did something the original footage couldn't. The footage showed what happened. Brianna explained what it felt like. And her statement about Richard's muttering, the words he said under his breath before the assault, added a new dimension to the federal case. At 9:15 p.m., Agent Reeves received a transcript of Brianna's video from a junior agent monitoring social media. She read it twice. Then she picked up the phone and called the lead federal prosecutor assigned to the case. "We need to interview the girl who recorded the video. She's saying the suspect made racially motivated statements before the assault. If that's corroborated, we have premeditation and bias motive." "That upgrades this to a hate crime," the prosecutor said. "Yes, it does." At 10 p.m., Malik woke up again. The room was dim. Danielle was still in the chair, finally dozing, her hand still on his. The television was off. The monitors beeped softly. Malik lay there in the dark. He stared at the ceiling. He could feel the stitches in his side, the dull ache that throbbed when he breathed too deep. He could feel the tape around the IV in his arm. He could hear his mother breathing beside him. And he could still feel it. The fist, the impact, the moment when the air left his body and didn't come back. He could feel the floor of the airplane against his back, the cold, the noise that was everywhere and nowhere. His mother's scream, the man's voice saying words that Malik understood even if he couldn't fully explain why they hurt. He pressed his hand against his stomach, lightly, above the bandage. It was real. It happened. He didn't dream it. He turned his head and looked at his mother. She was sleeping with her mouth slightly open and her hand curled around his like she was afraid he'd float away if she let go. Malik whispered, "I'm still here, Mama." Danielle didn't wake up, but her hand tightened around his. At 6 a.m. Thursday morning, Gloria Worthington landed at Denver International Airport. She carried one bag and a briefcase that held more legal firepower than most law firms assembled in a month. She had spent the entire flight reviewing the airline's public statements, Marcus Hale's preliminary audit summary that had been leaked to the press overnight, and every frame of Brianna Walsh's video. She arrived at Children's Hospital at 11:40 a.m. Danielle met her in the hallway outside Malik's room. They shook hands. Gloria was 61 years old, sharp-eyed, direct, the kind of woman who had spent decades in rooms where men tried to talk over her and failed. "How is he?" Gloria asked. "He's eating solid food. He walked to the bathroom on his own this morning. The doctors say 2 more days of observation and then we can go home." "Good. And how are you?" Nobody had asked Danielle that. Not the doctors, not the reporters, not even her sister, who had arrived the night before and immediately taken over logistics without asking how Danielle was holding up. Everybody assumed the mother was fine because the child was alive. Danielle looked at Gloria for a long moment. "I'm holding." "That's not the same as fine." "No, it's not." Gloria nodded. "It doesn't have to be fine. It just has to keep moving. Can you do that?" "I've been doing that since the second his body hit the floor." "Then let's talk about what happens next." They sat in the hospital cafeteria. Gloria laid it out. The federal criminal case against Richard was the government's fight. Assault aboard an aircraft, potential hate crime charges, possible civil rights violations. That was handled by the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office. Danielle's role there was as a witness and victim's advocate. But the civil case, that was Danielle's. The airline knew, Gloria said. They had documentation, 3 prior incidents, a flagged file, and they chose 3 separate times to accommodate the aggressor and relocate the victim. That's not negligence. That's a policy of appeasement that directly enabled the assault on your son. What are we asking for? Structural reform, independent oversight of their passenger complaint system, mandatory escalation protocols when racial bias indicators are present, a public database of enforcement actions, and yes, financial compensation. Because your son needed emergency surgery, will need ongoing medical care, and will carry the psychological impact of this for years. I told you I don't want money. And I respect that, But Danielle, a lawsuit without financial accountability is a suggestion. A lawsuit with financial accountability is a consequence. And consequences are the only language these corporations understand. Danielle looked at her hands. They were steady. They had been steady when she held Malik on the airplane floor, steady when she knocked on the cockpit door, steady when she stood in front of 40 cameras and told the world what happened to her son. "How much?" she asked. "We'll determine that through discovery, but given the severity of Malik's injuries, the documented pattern of negligence, and the public nature of this case, we're looking at 8 figures. 8 figures. Minimum. But I want you to hear me clearly. This isn't about punishing the airline. This is about making the cost of inaction so high that no board of directors in any company in this country ever looks at a flagged file and decides it's cheaper to move the victim." At 1 p.m., Gloria and Danielle walked back to Malik's room. Malik was sitting up in bed. His color was better. His eyes were sharper. He had a tray of hospital food in front of him and a look on his face that said he had opinions about it. "This soup tastes like nothing," he said when they walked in. "That's because it's hospital soup," Danielle said. "It's not supposed to taste like anything. Can I have real food?" "When the doctor says yes." Malik looked at Gloria. "Who are you?" Gloria smiled. "My name is Gloria. I'm a lawyer. I'm going to help your mom." "Help her with what?" "With making sure what happened to you doesn't happen to anyone else." Malik thought about that. "You mean the man on the plane?" "I mean everything about what happened. The man, the airline, all of it." "Is the man going to jail?" "That's for the court to decide, but he's facing very serious charges, and a lot of people are working very hard to make sure he's held accountable." Malik looked at his mother. "Mama, what's accountable mean?" Danielle sat on the edge of his bed. "It means when you do something wrong, you have to face what you did. You can't run from it. You can't pretend it didn't happen. You have to answer for it." "Like when I broke the lamp and you made me tell Auntie?" Danielle smiled for the first time in 3 days. A real smile. Small, but real. "Exactly like that, except bigger." "A lot bigger," Gloria said. At 3 p.m., Marcus Hale called Danielle's hospital room directly. He had gotten the number from the airline's victim liaison office. He wasn't sure she would take the call. She did. "Ms. Carter, this is Marcus Hale. I got your text. Thank you for what you said. I meant every word. I called because there's something I think you should know before it hits the press." Danielle sat up straighter. "Tell me." "The airline's internal review is expanding. They pulled the full history of their passenger incident management system going back 5 years. 217 passengers with 3 or more behavioral flags who were never restricted. That number just climbed. They found another 84 in the international database. 301 people. 301 people who the system flagged and the system ignored. And those are just the ones with 3 or more incidents. If you drop it to 2, the number doubles." Danielle was silent for 5 full seconds. "How many of those involve passengers of color?" "They're still running the analysis, but preliminary numbers show that in 71% of cases where a behavioral complaint was filed against a white passenger involving a passenger of color, the resolution was to move the targeted passenger rather than restrict the aggressor." 71%. 71%. That's not a bug, Ms. Carter. That's a feature. That's a system designed to protect comfort over safety, and it chose whose comfort mattered every single time. Danielle pressed her hand against her forehead. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I've been writing reports about this for years, and nobody listened. Because I sat on that airplane and watched a man punch your son, and I knew before his fist landed that this had happened before, and our company let it. Because tomorrow morning I'm turning over my full audit records to the FBI and the Department of Justice, and I want you to know what's in them before the lawyers start spinning it. You could lose your job." "I could, but your son almost lost his life. I know which one matters more." That evening, Danielle sat alone in Malik's room. He was sleeping. Her sister had gone back to the hotel. Gloria was at the airport Hilton preparing filings. Dr. Brooks had flown home to Baltimore. Marcus was in his hotel room writing his testimony. The room was quiet. The monitors beeped. The city hummed outside the window. Danielle picked up her phone. She opened the Notes app and began typing. Not a legal brief, not a press statement, a name. She typed, Safe Skies Initiative. Then below it she typed, a nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting children and families of color from racial violence in public travel spaces. She stared at it. She changed a word, changed it back, added a line. Founded by Danielle Carter, mother, nurse, survivor. She deleted survivor, typed fighter, deleted that too. She settled on 3 words, founded by a mother. She put the phone down, looked at Malik. His chest rose and fell. His hand was open on the blanket, palm up, fingers curled slightly inward. The Spider-Man comic was on the bedside table next to a cup of bad soup and a get well card from a nurse who had written, You're our superhero, Malik, in purple marker. Danielle picked up the card and held it. She read those words 5 times. Then she put it back down, picked up her phone again, and added one more line beneath the name of the organization she had just created in a hospital room at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday night in Denver, Colorado. Because no child should have to learn hatred at 30,000 feet. She saved it. She turned off her phone. She pulled her chair closer to Malik's bed, and for the first time in 3 days, Danielle Carter closed her eyes and slept. Malik was discharged from Children's Hospital Colorado on a Saturday morning, 4 days after a stranger's fist changed the course of his life. The doctors cleared him at 8 a.m. Danielle signed the papers at 8:12. By 8:30, they were in the back of a car, headed to the airport for a flight home to Los Angeles. A flight that the airline had personally arranged, first class, direct, with a private escort through the terminal. Malik didn't want to go. He stood in the hospital lobby with his backpack hanging off one shoulder and his Spider-Man comic clutched against his chest, and he looked at his mother and said, Do we have to fly? Danielle knelt down in front of him. She put her hands on his shoulders. We don't have to do anything you're not ready for. I don't want to be on a plane. I understand that. What if someone does it again? And there it was, the thing Danielle had been waiting for, the thing she knew was coming from the moment Malik opened his eyes after surgery and asked why. Not the bruise, not the stitches, the fear. The kind of fear that rewrites a child's understanding of safety. The kind that doesn't heal with sutures and painkillers. The kind that lives in the body and whispers every time a stranger gets too close. Danielle looked her son in the eyes. Malik, listen to me. What happened on that plane was wrong. It should never have happened. And I can't promise you that the world is always going to be safe. But I can promise you that I will always be there. And I can promise you that what happened to you, it's not the end of the story. It's the beginning. Because you and me, we're going to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. But to do that, we have to get home first. And to get home, we have to get on a plane. Malik looked at her for a long time. He was 9, but his eyes carried something older. Will you hold my hand? The whole way. Even during takeoff? Especially during takeoff. He nodded once, tightened his grip on the comic book. Okay. They walked to the car. Malik got in first. He didn't look back at the hospital. The flight home was quiet. A flight attendant named Rosa had been briefed on who they were. She came to their seats before boarding began and knelt down beside Malik. Hi, Malik. My name is Rosa. I'm going to take care of you today. If you need anything at all, a snack, a blanket, more juice, you just press that button right there and I'll come straight to you, okay? Malik studied her face. Are you nice? Rosa smiled. I try to be. The last flight attendant was nice too. She tried to help. I know she did. And I'm going to do the same. You're safe on my plane. Malik looked at his mother. Danielle nodded. He looked back at Rosa. Okay. He made it through the flight. He didn't read his comic. He didn't put on his headphones. He held his mother's hand from pushback to touchdown, his small fingers locked around hers, and he stared straight ahead at the seat back in front of him for 3 hours and 41 minutes. When the wheels touched the ground in Los Angeles, he let out a breath that he'd been holding for 4 days. We made it, he said. We made it, Danielle said. They walked through LAX together. Danielle's sister was waiting at arrivals with Malik's 2 cousins. The girls ran to him. He let them hug him, but held his left side slightly away, still tender. His aunt wrapped her arms around Danielle and held on for 30 seconds without saying a word. They went home. Malik walked into his room and stood in the middle of it for a full minute, looking around at everything. His bed, his desk, his action figures on the shelf, the poster of Spider-Man his father had taped to the wall 3 months before he died. "Mama," he called. Danielle appeared in the doorway. "Yeah, baby? Can I sleep in your room tonight?" "You can sleep in my room as long as you need to." He slept in her room for the next 3 weeks. The federal case against Richard Whitmore moved fast, faster than anyone expected. The U.S. Attorney's Office in Denver filed formal charges within 6 days of the incident. 2 counts: assault resulting in serious bodily harm aboard an aircraft under Federal Statute 49 U.S.C. Section 46504, and 1 count of committing a federal hate crime under the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act. The hate crime charge was the one that cracked the case open. Brianna Walsh's testimony was the key. The 17-year-old was interviewed by FBI agents at her father's apartment in Los Angeles. She told them everything she heard Richard say before the punch: the muttering, the slurs, the words that she said she would never repeat but would never forget. She had written them down in her phone's notes app within minutes of the incident, time-stamped, preserved. The federal prosecutor told the court that Brianna's contemporaneous notes, combined with the video evidence, Danielle's testimony, and the airline's own records showing a pattern of racially motivated confrontations, established beyond reasonable doubt that Richard Whitmore's assault on Malik Carter was driven by racial animus. Richard's defense attorney argued it was an isolated incident, a man under stress, too many drinks, poor judgment. The prosecutor responded with 3 words: 3 prior flights. Richard Whitmore went to trial 8 weeks later. It lasted 4 days. Marcus Hale testified on day 1. He walked the jury through his audit notes, page by page. He explained how the airline's passenger incident system worked. He showed them the flags in Richard's file. He told them that 3 times the system had identified Richard as a problem, and 3 times the company had chosen to move the person being targeted rather than restrict the person causing the harm. "Why?" the prosecutor asked. Marcus paused before answering. "Because it was easier. Because moving a passenger takes 30 seconds, and restricting one requires paperwork, review, legal approval, and the risk of a complaint. The system was designed to minimize disruption to the flight, not to protect the passengers being disrupted." And in the 3 incidents involving Mr. Whitmore, who was moved each time? The passengers of color, every time. The courtroom was silent. Dr. Brooks testified on day 2. He walked the jury through Malik's medical condition, the emergency on the airplane, the deteriorating vital signs, the rigid abdomen, the distension. He explained what would have happened if the plane hadn't diverted. "In your medical opinion, Dr. Brooks, what would the outcome have been if Flight 482 had continued to Los Angeles?" The boy would not have survived. He said it without hesitation, without hedging. He looked at the jury and said it the way he said things in operating rooms, directly, clearly, with the full weight of a man who understood the difference between almost dead and dead. Danielle testified on day 3. She walked the jury through every minute, from the moment they boarded to the moment the ambulance doors closed. She told them about the whispers, the complaints, the stare, the grab, the punch. She told them about kneeling on the floor of an airplane holding her son while he gasped for air. She told them about knocking on the cockpit door and begging the captain to land. The defense attorney cross-examined her. He tried to suggest that Malik might have provoked Richard, that perhaps there was more noise than Danielle recalled, that perhaps she was too tired from her conference to notice her son's behavior. Danielle looked at him. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. It went flat and steady and cold. "My son was reading a comic book. He said 4 words on that entire flight. 'Thank you, ma'am,' to the flight attendant who handed him his juice, and 'Mama, I gotta use the bathroom.' That's it. That's all he said. 4 words. And a grown man punched him in the stomach for it. If you're standing in this courtroom trying to find a reason why a 9-year-old deserved that, I'd suggest you sit down." The defense attorney did not ask another question. Brianna Walsh testified on day 4. She told the jury what she heard. She read from her phone notes the exact words Richard muttered before the assault. The courtroom went quiet in a way that felt heavy, like the air itself had thickened. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and 27 minutes. Guilty, both counts. Richard Whitmore was convicted of aggravated assault aboard an aircraft and 1 count of federal hate crime against a minor. Sentencing was scheduled for 60 days later. The judge set bail at $1.2 million. Richard couldn't post it. He was taken back to federal custody in the same handcuffs he'd worn when they pulled him off Flight 482. The same man who had sat back in his seat and straightened his collar and said someone had to do it, now walked with his head down and his shoulders caved and his lips pressed tight because he had nothing left to say that anyone wanted to hear. Danielle was outside the courthouse when the verdict was read. Gloria stood beside her. Danielle's sister held her hand. Malik wasn't there. He was at home with his cousins. Danielle didn't want him anywhere near that building. A reporter called out, "Ms. Carter, what's your reaction to the verdict?" Danielle stepped to the microphones. She had done this once before, outside a hospital, covered in exhaustion and adrenaline. This time was different. She was rested. She was dressed. She was ready. This verdict is not about revenge. It's about accountability. A man made a choice. He chose violence against a child. And today, a jury told him, and told this country, that choice has a consequence. She paused. But I want to say something else. This case is not over. Because Richard Whitmore didn't act alone. He was enabled by a system that saw the warning signs and looked the other way. By a company that moved the victims and protected the aggressor. By a culture that made it easier to relocate a black family to the back of a plane than to tell a white man to sit down. That system is what I'm going after next. And I won't stop until it's dismantled. 2 months later, Richard Whitmore was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. The judge's remarks lasted 9 minutes. She addressed Richard directly. "Mr. Whitmore, you had the opportunity to sit quietly on an airplane and do nothing. Instead, you chose to target a child who was not bothering you, a child who was not speaking to you, a child whose only offense was existing in your proximity. You chose hatred. You chose violence, and you chose to inflict it on someone who could not defend himself. This court does not take that lightly." 12 years. No parole eligibility for 10. Richard stood motionless. His attorney put a hand on his shoulder. Richard shrugged it off. He was led out of the courtroom. He did not look at anyone. The civil lawsuit Danielle and Gloria filed against the airline went to mediation 4 months after the criminal conviction. It lasted 11 days. The airline fought it at first. They brought in a team of 8 attorneys. They argued that the criminal case was about one man's actions, not a corporate policy. Gloria dismantled that argument in 2 hours. She presented the internal audit Marcus had provided. 217 flagged passengers with no restrictions. 71% of racial complaints resolved by moving the victim. 3 prior incidents involving Richard Whitmore, all buried, all marked closed. This is not about one man's actions, Gloria told the mediator. This is about a system that made those actions possible. A system that watched a pattern develop and chose profit and convenience over the safety of its passengers. Malik Carter nearly died because this airline decided 3 separate times that it was easier to move a black passenger than to confront a white aggressor. That's not negligence. That's a policy. The airline settled on day 11. The amount was not disclosed publicly, but sources close to the case confirmed it was in excess of $24 million. The settlement included mandatory structural reforms, an independent passenger safety oversight board, real-time threat assessment protocols, mandatory bias training for all employees, and a publicly accessible annual report on how passenger complaints involving race were handled and resolved. Gloria called Danielle that evening. "It's done." Danielle was sitting on her back porch. Malik was in the yard throwing a ball with his cousins, moving carefully, still sore, but laughing. "All of it?" Danielle asked. "All of it. The financial settlement, the structural reforms, the oversight board, every single thing we asked for." They agreed to the public reporting. They pushed back hard. I pushed harder. They agreed. Danielle watched Malik throw the ball. It went wide. His cousin chased it. Malik bent over laughing, then grabbed his side and laughed again. Gloria, yeah? Thank you. You did this, Danielle, not me. You stood up before the country had a name for what happened. You told the truth before anyone asked for it. I just gave it legal shape. Danielle used the settlement to launch the Safe Skies Initiative. It was incorporated as a nonprofit 3 weeks later. Its mission was specific: protecting children and families of color from racial violence and discrimination in public travel spaces. Airlines, trains, buses, ride shares, anywhere a family should feel safe and didn't. She hired a staff of 7, 2 attorneys, a policy director, a family advocate, a communications lead, a data analyst, and 1 program coordinator who had been a flight attendant for 15 years and knew every gap in the system because she'd been forced to work around them. Within 6 months, the Safe Skies Initiative had partnered with 4 major airlines to develop new protocols for handling racially motivated complaints. Within a year, it had been cited in 3 congressional hearings on transportation safety. Within 18 months, 2 federal bills were introduced referencing the organization's research. One mandating independent oversight boards for passenger incident management, and another requiring airlines to publicly disclose patterns of repeated behavioral complaints. Danielle testified before Congress twice. Both times, she brought the same thing: Malik's Spider-Man comic. She placed it on the table in front of her microphone and left it there while she spoke. She never referenced it. She never explained it. She didn't have to. Marcus Hale resigned from the airline 3 months after the settlement, not because he was forced out, because he was done. He joined the Safe Skies Initiative as a senior advisor. He brought 11 years of internal audit data with him and spent the next 2 years helping build the most comprehensive passenger safety database in the industry. Dr. Brooks returned to Johns Hopkins. He continued his trauma surgery practice. But once a month, on a Saturday morning, he called Danielle's house and asked to speak to Malik. "Hey, Spider-Man." "Hey, Dr. Brooks. How you feeling?" "Good. My side doesn't hurt anymore." "That's what I like to hear. You keeping up with your reading?" "Yeah, I finished the whole Spider-Man series. I'm reading Batman now." "Batman? Switching teams on me?" "Batman doesn't have superpowers. He just works really hard." Dr. Brooks smiled on the other end of the line. "Yeah, he does." Malik went back to school 2 weeks after returning to Los Angeles. He was quiet at first. He sat in the back of the classroom. He didn't raise his hand. He didn't talk at lunch. His teacher called Danielle after the first week and said she was worried. Danielle met with the teacher and the school counselor. They developed a plan. Give him space. Let him come back on his own timeline. Don't force participation. Let him lead. 3 weeks passed, then 4, then 6. Then one Monday morning, Malik's teacher assigned the class a presentation. The topic was simple: talk about a time you were brave. Malik raised his hand. "Can I go first?" The teacher almost dropped her coffee. "Of course." He walked to the front of the room. He didn't have notes. He didn't have a poster. He had his Spider-Man comic tucked under his arm, the same one from Flight 482. Bent pages, worn cover, a coffee stain on the back from where a cup tipped over in the ambulance. He stood in front of 23 classmates, and he said this: "A couple months ago, I was on an airplane with my mom. We were flying home from Atlanta. I was reading this comic book." He held it up. "A man across the aisle punched me in the stomach. He didn't know me. I didn't do anything to him. He just hit me." The classroom was silent. 23 9-year-olds staring at him. The teacher had her hand over her mouth. "I had to have surgery because I have a thing in my stomach from when I was little. The doctor on the plane said I could have died. My mom made the plane land in Denver. She knocked on the pilot's door. She's not even supposed to do that." A few kids laughed softly. Malik almost smiled. "I was really scared. I'm still kind of scared sometimes, like when someone walks too close behind me or when I hear someone yelling on a plane. I get this feeling in my stomach, and I think it's going to happen again." He paused. He looked down at his comic book. "But my mom told me something. She said being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you're scared and you keep going anyway. And I think that's true, because I was scared to come back to school. I was scared to give this presentation. I was scared to get on the plane to come home. But I did all of it. He looked up. My name is Malik Carter. I'm 9 years old. A man hit me on an airplane and I almost died. But I didn't, and I'm still here. He walked back to his seat. The teacher was crying. She didn't try to hide it. 3 kids in the front row clapped. Then 5 more. Then the whole room. That afternoon, the teacher called Danielle. You need to know what your son did today. She told her everything, word for word, because she had written it down the moment Malik sat back in his chair. Danielle hung up the phone. She sat on the edge of her bed. She pressed her hands against her face, and she let go of everything she'd been carrying since seat 14C. A mother's scream on an airplane. A surgeon's hands on her son's stomach, a cockpit door she wasn't supposed to knock on, a hospital floor she paced for 16 hours, a microphone she stepped up to because nobody else was going to, a lawsuit she filed because silence was no longer an option, a nonprofit she built because this could not happen to another child, and a 9-year-old boy standing in front of his class saying, "I'm still here," like it was the bravest sentence ever spoken. Because it was. That evening, Danielle sat with Malik on the back porch. The sun was going down. His cousins had gone home. The yard was quiet. Your teacher called me, Danielle said. I know. She told me about your presentation. Was it okay? Malik, it was more than okay. He leaned into her shoulder. I was nervous. I know. But I did it anyway. That's what brave looks like. They sat there together as the light dimmed and the air cooled, and the world kept turning the way it always does, imperfect and broken and bruised, and still somehow held together by the people who refused to stop fighting for something better. At 30,000 feet, one punch tried to silence a child. 15 minutes later, an entire system was forced to answer. And the boy it was meant to break stood up in front of his class, held up a worn-out Spider-Man comic, and told the whole